Hello, dear friends, especially in the US, but also greetings to every single freedom-loving person in the world who is watching this video. And greetings also to you who are watching this, but who completely disagree with me. I have been thinking about making this video for quite some time. The first time it crossed my mind was during the George Floyd protests, which quickly turned into riots and looting, declaration of autonomous areas, destruction of statues, bending the knee, and the rest of it. Then I thought about it before the elections. But all this time I was thinking, who am I to make any statements or messages? I am nobody who would listen to what I have to say. Then the elections came and everything went along with them, including all the doubts about the results. But I still thought that although it looked really fishy from outside, and I for the life of me could not comprehend how you could consider any of your elections legitimate without a clear and unique form of voter identification. But I had some hopes it would all get better and the whole situation would turn back to normal. The winners would celebrate and the whole American system of democracy would continue. But then came the 6th of January and all that followed, and I simply cannot remain silent anymore. I really don't know how many people are going to watch this and listen to what I have to say, but I don't really care anymore. I simply have to put this out there. Dear Americans and pretty much everybody listening to this, I would like to warn you. I was born in 1977 in what was formerly known as Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, one of the countries within the so-called Eastern Bloc and behind the so-called Iron Curtain. My parents were born into the same regime 30 years before me, and until the year 1989 they knew nothing but socialist dictatorship. And I believe that what happened in your country during the last 4 years, and especially in the year 2020, is starting to resemble my former socialist country more and more. What I absolutely cannot understand is how many people in the US consider socialism a viable alternative. Bernie Sanders, a socialist, was the favorite of many people in 2016 and also in 2020. But more importantly, the increasing prevalence of the ideas of progressive liberalism, political correctness, identity politics in your country is an absolute shock to me. All those ideas are nothing but socialism, communism in disguise. We who lived not in the world of rosy ideas, but in the real socialism, with its everyday consequences, considered the West to be the land of the free, the land of freedom to think, to speak, to write, to read, to believe, and preach whatever you wanted. And you truly were all of those things. I was therefore shocked to find out how prevalent the leftist and socialist ideas are in the West, and how romanticized they are. But the explanation of this phenomenon is quite simple. You have never experienced what it's like to actually live under a socialist regime. Let me therefore give you a brief historical overview of how the communists gained power in my country and what were the consequences of them gaining it. And perhaps it would help you to see what has been happening in your country in a different light. Ignoring the lessons of history is foolish. It seems to me that for a very long time you have lived under the impression that your country can never become like the countries east of the Iron Curtain. Well, you have been wrong all along. You have been ignoring history, sleeping at the wheel for decades, and the communists in disguise in your country were busy robbing you of all your freedoms. And perhaps you are now beginning to realize, as they are finally openly pulling out their hammer and sickle, how far you let them influence your country. But I still think many of you don't have a real idea of how serious this really is. So as I said, let me give you a brief historical overview. The first Czechoslovak Republic rose out of the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy in 1918, after the World War I. This republic was one of the economically strongest countries in Europe. The Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, CPC, was founded in 1921. It wasn't the only leftist party in the country. There was also the Czechoslovak Social Democrat Workers' Party, which was founded in 1878 during the monarchy, and although it went through several name changes, it was still the same party. This party was therefore one of the established parties with the center-left leanings. The CPC, however, was a new leftist stream, a new party with extremely leftist leanings. Its first years were very turbulent, and although it was an extremist party which openly stated that its goal was the destruction of the existing system, the destruction of the republic, it was considered only as a fringe party, and it was thus foolishly tolerated. But then came the year 1929. Several very important things happened in this year. You see, one of the most important things which we as humans fail to realize over and over again is that all the bloodbaths of the 20th century were not some ghastly exceptions in what was otherwise a very orderly progress of the intelligent, reasonable, and peaceful human race, but that they were rather natural consequences and extensions of who we truly are, and of that very progress we made, and that all that was needed for those bloodbaths to appear was the right mixture of circumstances. This has happened over and over and over again. Our belief in our seeming progress, rationality, and goodness, then trifling with disastrous ideas considered by the majority as something so extreme that it would never get traction, or contrary as something so good that it simply cannot be even disputed. Then absolutely criminal exploitation of those ideas for personal gain of certain individuals and groups and media, then a sudden breaking point in the form of a mixture of just the right circumstances, and then a bloodbath, a holocaust, a purge, a genocide, and then an utter disbelief, shock, and vows of never again. Read the book Modernity and the Holocaust by Zygmunt Bauman, which explores and explains this. Maybe I will make another video about it, just about the book, because it is excellent. So what happened in 1929? The first thing was Stalin's gaining of absolute power in the Soviet Union, and his attempts to interfere in the affairs of foreign countries via particular communist parties in those countries. Based on these instructions from the Bolshevik Soviet Union, a group led by Klement Gottwald carried out a putsch within the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia and gained power over it. Then they slowly but surely pushed out unwanted people from the party, and by the end of the year they were completely under the authority of Stalin and Moscow. They were not only a section of Soviet Kominterna, that is a foreign body within the Czechoslovak Republic, but now they obeyed the instructions from Moscow to the letter. The CPC gained 10% in the elections in October 1929, which was 3% less than 4 years before, so nobody thought much about it. However, with Klement Gottwald, who thus got into the parliament, the party wasn't weakened, but its voice grew even stronger and more radical. Before Christmas, Gottwald addressed the parliament with the key speech, in which he said the following, quote, "We fight against the state whose apparatus is an instrument of violence in the hands of capitalists against the working class." End quote. He labeled all the government parties as social fascists, and he spoke of the goal, which was the proletarian state. He spoke of an uprising, a social revolution, and the dictatorship of the proletariat. He said the communists would fight with no regard to casualties until the system is destroyed. The Communist Party would break existing laws because they go against the workers. And he openly threatened, quote, "One day we will deal with you in the exact same way the Russian Bolsheviks dealt with Tsar and with bourgeoisie. In Soviet Union, the proletarians are learning to shoot the capitalists, that means you. They are building gallows there for you. They are building tanks there against you, the capitalists. We go to Moscow to learn how to break your neck. This speech was met with huge outrage because it called for the destruction of the state. But it was all part of the plan. The Prague Red Evening Journal was published with a circulation of 300,000. The speech was very soon published as a brochure and also in Russian on the first page of the Soviet communist newspaper Pravda, which means truth. This was a common name of the main newspapers in communist countries, a truly fitting name for something which was full of nothing but lies. What is important for my warning to you is that although this speech was met with outrage and indignation, nothing really happened, because it was dismissed as an idle threat of a fringe lunatic. But these fringe lunatics were able to more than fulfill what they said they would do. Because something else happened in 1929. The Wall Street crash on the US stock exchange happened, which led to a huge world economic crisis, which in turn led to a meteoric rise of popularity of one party in Germany, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party, the party of Adolf Hitler. If you want to understand your present position, dear Americans, you have to understand these two men, Stalin and Hitler. They are very often regarded as the polar opposites of each other, but that is not the case. They both had a huge lust for power. They both worshipped power. They both hated the existing system of Judeo-Christian values of the Western civilization and wanted to destroy them. They both therefore hated freedom in any shape and form. They both had absolutely no regard for common people and the amount of casualties needed to achieve their goals. They both dreamed of world domination, and they both espoused the same collectivist ideology. You see, again, we tend to see Nazism and communism as mutually exclusive, but they are actually two sides of the same coin, two forms of socialism, if you will. They are both collectivist ideologies. They are both forms of identity politics, with the only exception that in one case the basis for identity is race, and in the other case the basis for identity is social class. And yes, I have used the present tense there, because these ideologies are still around. What is absolutely crucial to understand is that the modern progressive liberalism and political correctness and identity politics movement is a mixture of both of these elements. It is fundamentally racist and classist at the same time. And the people espousing this ideology have been at work within your country for decades. Some of them even fled Hitler and Stalin only to spread these deadly ideas in various different forms within your universities and other state institutions. And this is another of those crucial things we tend to overlook again and again, that countries do not turn into hellholes only because of certain bad people misapplying otherwise good ideologies, but that they turn into hellholes because of those ideologies regardless of people who apply them. And this is precisely what has been happening in your country. But you still have a chance to reverse it. I believe you still haven't come to that point after which there is no return, although you are very close to it, I think. And what does that point look like? Well, in Hitler's case, it was the Night of the Long Knives. And in Stalin's case, it was a series of several purges. But basically, in both cases, it was the physical elimination of your perceived opponents and critics, either by extrajudicial executions and killings, or by imprisonment in concentration camps, which were the atrocious parts of both regimes, not just Nazism, and in which most of those people died. The Night of the Long Knives is especially significant for you, dear Americans, because it was aimed not only against Hitler's real opponents and critics, but also against his closest allies, who initially helped him tremendously. One of them was Ernst Röhm, the leader of the SA, Sturmabteilung, which was ironically the 1930s equivalent of Antifa and Black Lives Matter thugs. Rome was a huge ally of Hitler and a great help to him in the beginning when precisely what he provided was needed: street violence and thuggery. But when Hitler rose to political power and wanted to appease the leaders of the actual military, whom he desperately needed and who despised Rome and SA, Rome and SA had to go. They had to be erased. And these people had to be erased not only physically, but also from memory. Because the exact same thing happened under Stalin. You can Google the Stalin photo erased persons and see for yourselves how Stalin's allies, one by one, were erased from the photographs with him as they were gradually purged and killed. And this is also a message to those who are in the same position in the US today. Do you really think the ones who use you now to gain political power will reward you, and that you will be the part of the brave new world they want to create? Indeed, they will reward you, but you won't like their reward. To come back to the story of the CPC in my country, it was exactly the same. My country was a fascist vassal of the Nazi Germany during World War II, which created just perfect opportunity for the communist power grab after the war. And again, the man who orchestrated the putsch by which the CPC gained absolute power in my country in 1948, Rudolf Slansky, who was as the General Secretary of the CPC also the main director and scriptwriter of the infamous monster trials with the enemies of the state. He died by the sword by which he lived. He was sentenced to death by hanging in one of the following monster trials, on the orders of his masters from Moscow. As the guillotine of the French Revolution testifies, revolution always devours its own children. So, what was the paradise like that these people finally managed to prepare for my parents and for me? Well, as long as Stalin lived, it was just terror and judicial murdering of the inner enemies. This was from 1948 to 1953. These years were the worst in terms of the likelihood of getting a death penalty or a very long prison sentence for completely bogus and trivial charges. You could have been a young boy telling an anti-regime joke. Your friends would snitch on you, and you would get 20 years in prison. This really happened. The monster trials were meticulously designed spectacles for the masses. The people had the chance to publicly express their hatred of the accused. The prisoners were tortured in hideous ways to confess their crimes, and once their will was completely broken, they had to learn the trial scripts word for word and play their parts in court. One of the vilest ones was the Milada Horakova trial. This brave woman stood firm to the very end and was hanged despite the pleas of people like Albert Einstein for her pardon. If you were lucky and you weren't hanged, you ended up in one of the terrible communist prisons, which were in some way worse than death. You were beaten daily, and many of the political prisoners had to mine uranium in the Yakimov uranium mines, and you can guess how that went for them. This was Orwell's 1984 in real life. After Stalin's death and after the disclosure of the atrocities of his reign, the situation softened some in my country. The 1960s looked very promising. There were talks about socialism with human face, which was a sorry acknowledgement of its inhumanity. Some of the books and films which were absolutely banned in the 50s were allowed to be published and screened. Not all of them, of course, just some. The music from the West found its way to our country too. Well, and then it was all ended by the Soviet tanks in August 1968. The years of so-called normalization ensued, because obviously the events of the 60s were not normal for the communist mind. Those 21 years to 1989 completely broke the spirit of my country, and the people fell into complete lethargy. By this time, the economy was on its knees. You had to queue for things like meat, bananas, and oranges. You had only one lousy kind of everything to choose from. If you wanted to buy a car, you had to apply for it and get a registration in a waiting list. Wait for it for a very long time, and then you either got a Lada or a Skoda, and if you got a color you didn't like, tough luck. And of course, you had to pay for it. If you were in a band and you had to play your songs in front of a committee, which then decided whether your music and your lyrics are permissible or not. And of course, any article, book, or a movie had to go through the same approval process. Every aspect of public life was under communist control, and even large parts of your privacy. The secret police bugged apartments, houses, etc. There is an excellent German movie called The Lives of Others about this. You should really check it out to get a more vivid picture of what I am talking about here. And do not think the things were much softer imprisonment-wise. The state secret police was constantly on the hunt. People were going to prison or losing jobs. If you had the wrong views, you were never left alone by the state. Many people became secret agents to improve their social status, and they snitched on their friends and even family. You see, this paradise wasn't everybody is equal. No, the communists love money very much. Just not the money they earn by their hard work, but other people's money they shamelessly steal. The communist gerontocrats live in opulent luxury while the rest of the people have the bare minimum. The new communist nobility, the new communist bourgeoisie, if you will, also had access to everything that was banned for other people as Western trash. You could not travel, of course. My country was divided from its Western neighbors by several layers of barbed wire fence with live electricity. People who tried to cross these borders were torn to pieces by the police dogs, or shot by the border patrol, or arrested if they were lucky. Can you imagine living in Bratislava and seeing Austria from the castle hill there, and know that only the air and the Danube River separated you from a completely different life? Some people managed to fly over with rogolos. Some tried to swim. Some made it, but more drowned. If you managed to emigrate in the 1950s and left family behind, your family suffered greatly. In the 60s it was less of a problem, and even after 1968 there was a window when you could leave, but after that, again, really tough. Even if you wanted to travel to a socialist country, you needed a special permit. If you somehow managed to get hold of something Western, like a plastic shopping bag, you kept it like a treasure. I lived in this all for 12 years of my life. My parents didn't tell me the truth about the matrix I was experiencing day by day. They had to smile when I recited communist poems and sang communist songs to them, which I learned in the indoctrination centers called schools. When I was older, I became what was called a spark, and later a pioneer, which was the socialist version of Hitlerjugend. We wore blue uniforms with badges for sparks and couldn't wait to receive the red pioneer scarf. There was a ceremony when we received those, during which we had to shout out loud that we were always ready to build and to protect our socialist motherland. Everywhere you went, you could see signs with various socialist slogans about the friendship with the Soviet Union forever and ever, and stuff like that. Now, someone might ask, but was it all just bad? Wasn't there anything good? Well, it all depended on who you were. If your mommy and daddy were members of the CPC, or some high-profile politicians, public officials, scientists, singers, actors, or any public figures, not criticizing the regime. In other words, if you and your family in any way profited from the regime, then of course it was very good for you. But also, if you were willing to trade all your freedoms for certainty of some form of employment, basic income, some form of housing, and some form of healthcare, it was good for you as well. And there were many people in both of these groups. But it was evil through and through, because those were the only options you had if you wanted to live your life untroubled by the state. The other options were inner emigration, quiet dissent, alcoholism, suicide, open dissent, and imprisonment, with the high possibility of dying in prison. There was no sense of community, nothing, just bleak, grey, everyday grind without any possibility of change. But then Chernobyl happened. Then Gorbachev happened, and Perestroika and Glasnost happened. And then the unthinkable, the unbelievable, the impossible happened. The Berlin Wall came down, the Iron Curtain was torn from top to bottom, and this hideous regime fell in most of the Eastern Bloc countries. I was in utter shock when my parents started to cry the first tears of freedom and truth, and when they began to tell me the truth about the regime that was until then everywhere around us. But if you think a country with a broken spirit is easy to heal, you are wrong. Last year in March, we had elections which led to the first government after 31 years that did not contain any former communists. You see, the revolution in 1989 was a velvet revolution, meaning there was no Nuremberg for those crooks. So, do you think they hid their tails between their legs and disappeared in shame? No, no way. They just changed their coats and became social democrats and the new businessmen who managed to acquire most of the state property that was then available for privatization. Who do you think are the people who hold most of the capital in my country even today? Former communists and their children, former secret police agents and their children, the graduates of MGIMO, Moscow Institute of International Relations, also known as the Foreign Russian Asset Factory. The 1990s were like Wild West in my country. The people were finally allowed to own property. Yes, you hear correctly. They were finally allowed to own property and run a business. And if you had the guts to do it and worked hard in those years, you could start a successful business pretty quickly. But there were also other people that came out of the woodwork. Various mafia gangs formed, and since the new legal system was only forming, they could and they did extort money from many small businesses. In January 1993, we separated from the Czech Republic, and my current country, the Slovak Republic, was formed. As soon as in 1994 we elected such crooks into government that their times were really bad. Mafia was interconnected with politics. The new Slovak Intelligence Service, SIS, was doing the dirty work of the corrupt politicians. I will give you one example. The Prime Minister in those years had a conflict with the President, so the agents of SIS kidnapped the President's son and drove him to Austria. They poured alcohol into him in the car and they left him near a police station in another country unconscious. When the scandal broke out and one of the SIS agents testified and fled abroad, one of his contacts in Slovakia was assassinated. He burned to death in his car, which exploded. There were also mafia wars everywhere in my country in the 90s. People were shot and cars exploded quite often, and there were even cases of severed heads of a mobster and a police officer found in the streets. It was really, really bad. The people in power had also stolen so much money from the public budget that our country was on the verge of bankruptcy. Then came the best years we had as a country after 1989, which were the years 1998 to 2006. The right-wing parties finally came to power. There were great economic reforms made. Our country became a member state of the European Union and of NATO. These two steps were absolutely vital for the consolidation of my country and its attachment to the western part of the world. The same parties managed to form a government coalition also after the 2006 elections, but this coalition sadly lasted only 2 years. The economic disaster of 2008 led to the bankruptcy of Greece, which was supposed to be bailed out by the rest of the EU. We didn't want to do that because the Greek socialists were throwing away the EU money and buying their voters with disproportionately high wages and pensions, which we could only dream of in Slovakia. And so why would we want to pour more billions into a completely irresponsible country run by socialists? But the pressure from the EU was so strong that our government caved in and joined the vote about the bailout with the vote about the government actually remaining in power. And since one of the coalition parties voted with the opposition against the bailout, the government fell, and the early elections of 2008 were won by the former communists disguised as social democrats. And those people were in charge of my country for the last 12 years and basically stole the whole country again. The mafiosi from the 90s were either dead or they became wealthy businessmen. And these people, together with the crooks in the government, basically turned my country into a mafia state. It was all very subtle though. No more shootings, no more street fighting. This was sophisticated white-collar crime, which slowly but surely flooded all the state institutions on all levels. One of the journalists who was able to uncover their corrupt dealings was murdered with his fiancée, Jan Kuciak. Perhaps you have heard about this case, which led to the fall of this crooked government, and now several of the public officials are in jail. And I hope it will continue, although this corona thing really gets in the way of that. As I said, this government formed in March 2020 is the first government after 31 years without any former communists in it. Yes, we now have all the freedoms you still have, and I believe that there is actually more freedom now in my country than in yours, which is saying a lot. I would not immigrate to your country now even if you paid me. However, we are still economically and spiritually broken. What do I mean by that? You see, the communist, socialist dictatorship just mows your soul. Since you were not allowed to own anything, one of the mottos of those totalitarian years was, if you don't steal, you steal from your family. Because you see, if everything belonged to everybody, and the socialist nobility lived in luxury, all the restraints were broken. People began to steal from everywhere, from factories, from the state cooperatives, etc. And if you had your soul mauled like that for 40 years, it is very hard to change that mentality. When the borders opened after 1989, we flooded the neighboring Austria. And what do you think we did with all those beautiful and expensive things we saw there? That's right, we were stealing them, so much so that the shop owners put up signs saying in Slovak, Slovaks do not steal here. It was terrible. And this mentality is still here even to this day. So now we have all the Western stuff. We have the prices at the EU level, all right, but the wages and the standard of living, it is much better than it was, but still, what do you think is the combined net yearly income of me and my wife? Hold your hat. It is 15,000 euros. That is the net yearly income of me and my wife together. And we have to pay our mortgage, our bills, we have 2 children, etc. We manage, but it's quite hard. And I work as a translator and my wife is a pharmacist. There are people much worse off than us. And what we also have is a counter-reaction to anything only remotely connected to socialism in any form. And thus, because of the mess EU created with the immigration crisis, we now have neo-Nazis in parliament. And again, They began as a fringe party called Slovak Togetherness at first, which was banned as illegal. But then they got smarter. They changed their name to People's Party, Our Slovakia. They made sure they were within the legal boundaries in terms of their statute and public statements, but they were the same people. And with their anti-immigrant and anti-EU rhetoric, they managed to get elected into the parliament. But then they got cocky, and their leaders were provoking the authorities with things like giving checks for 1,488 euros to charities and other things. So now their leader faces 4 years in prison. So we try to deal with it, as you see, but that we even have to do it is a result of what is going on in the West. But my country is not the only one. Take a look anywhere you want and compare the footprint of socialist, communist ideology and the footprint of the Western Christian values. The difference is staggering. It is the difference between the North and South Korea. It was the difference between the West and East Berlin, divided by the wall. Socialism and communism in any shape and form create nothing but hellholes from which people want to flee. And as I said, this has been true regardless of the people who were in charge. It is the ideology itself in any form, not the people who apply it. And indeed, people have been running from those hellholes in droves and still are. And they have been and are running to the West, to you. And maybe you are listening to this all and you think, okay, but this will never happen here in the US. It just cannot. No? You think you are too big and too free and too whatever to fall like this? What about Russia? What about China? How on earth could communists there gain control over so many millions of people and still maintain it? Well, slowly but surely, one step at a time, one slice of salami at a time, 1 degree of the thermometer at a time, until there was nowhere else to go, until there was nothing more to slice but you, until you were at the exact perfect boiling point when they gave you the final blow and took all your power and freedom. Do not let this happen in your country, and do not be deceived. This has been happening in your country for a very long time, and you are at a tipping point. And you, dear friends in the UK and Australia and elsewhere, do not let this happen in your countries as well. If you fall, no one is going to help you, but your fall will have dramatic consequences for freedom in the rest of the world. But this has also another layer, which is the spiritual one. And here I will maybe lose some of you, but I hope you will hear me out. Because I am speaking to you also as a Christian, and I believe that what has made the West so great and so appealing to the rest of the world was the fruit of biblical Christian values. And I mean specifically the values as they are preserved in the Bible and in the great Protestant confessions of faith. The Western ethics wasn't built on the Enlightenment values of freedom, equality, and brotherhood. No, these values actually replaced God and put man in the center. And instead of the anchor of hope being fixed in the expectation of the eternal home prepared by God, it brought the idea of heaven on earth without God, the earthly utopia of world equality, freedom, and brotherhood, which is unattainable due to our sinfulness and depravity, and which has always led to death and misery. There is a line in the Bible, in the 2 Chronicles 7:14, in which God says, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land." Your country, dear Americans, is in deep trouble. You are extremely divided, and your relationships are very unhealthy. The ones who were creating all this division and greatly profiting from it are now calling for unity, but it is only the unity of absolute surrender to their demands, which is no unity at all, but tyranny. And yet, still a majority of you consider yourselves evangelical or born-again Christians. And I believe that the majority of you don't even want this. Now, to be fair, my country is supposedly 80% Christian as well. But you see, if this was true, yours and my country wouldn't be in this huge trouble at all. There is something significantly wrong with the profession of faith of most of the people in our countries. The only way to true healing in your land and in any land is in humility before God, in honest and fervent prayer to Him, and in repentance, in turning away from the wicked ways and turning towards God through faith in Jesus Christ and His atoning sacrifice. You are not fighting against flesh and blood, dear friends, but against the powers and principalities of evil. I know how it sounds, but consider for a moment the depravity of your elites, of all the leaked emails with pedophile code words, of all the Epsteins and their clients, of all the child effigy burning worshippers in secret groves, etc. Do you think this is something new? Do you think that because we can pilot airplanes and split atom, that we are somehow different from the people of the past ages? No, we are not. But if you don't want to hear from the Bible, how about hearing your situation explained by one of your best writers, Cormac McCarthy? This is a quote from his book, No Country for Old Men. This book takes place in the year 1980, but it was published in 2005. And this is the character of Sheriff Bell speaking, and you won't hear any of this in the movie, by the way. Quote, I won't talk about the war neither. I was supposed to be a war hero and I lost a whole squad of men. Got decorated for it. They died and I got a medal. I don't even need to know what you think about that. There ain't a day I don't remember it. Some boys I know come back. They went on to school up at Austin on the GI Bill. They had hard things to say about their people. Some of them did. Called them a bunch of rednecks and all such as that. Didn't like their politics. 2 generations in this country is a long time. You're talking about the early settlers. I used to tell them that having your wife and children killed and scalped and gutted like fish has a tendency to make some people irritable, but they didn't seem to know what I was talking about. I think the 60s in this country sobered some of them up. I hope it did. I read in the papers here a while back some teachers come across a survey that was sent out back in the 30s to a number of schools around the country. Had this questionnaire about what was the problems with teaching in schools. And they come across these forms. They had been filled out and sent in from around the country answering these questions. And the biggest problems they could name was things like talking in class and running in the hallways, chewing gum, copying homework, things of that nature. So they got one of them forms that was blank and printed up a bunch of them and sent them back out to the same schools 40 years later. Well, here come the answers back. Rape, arson, murder, drugs, suicide. So I think about that. Because a lot of the time when I say anything about how the world is going to hell in a handbasket, people will just sort of smile and tell me I'm getting old. That it's one of the symptoms. But my feeling about that is that anybody that can't tell the difference between raping and murdering people and chewing gum has got a whole bit bigger problem than what I've got. 40 years is not a long time neither. Maybe the next 40 of it will bring some of them out from under the ether, if it ain't too late. Here a year or 2 back, me and Loretta went to a conference in Corpus Christi, and I got sat next to this woman. She was the wife of somebody or other, and she kept talking about the right wing this and the right wing that. I ain't even sure what she meant by it. The people I know are mostly just common people, common as dirt, as the saying goes. I told her that, and she looked at me funny. She thought I was saying something bad about them, but of course that's a high compliment in my part of the world. She kept on, finally told me, said, I don't like the way this country is headed. I want my granddaughter to be able to have an abortion. And I said, well, ma'am, I don't think you got any worries about the way the country is headed. The way I see it going, I don't have much doubt but what she'll be able to have an abortion. I'm going to say that not only will she be able to have an abortion, she'll be able to have you put to sleep, which pretty much ended the conversation. End quote. Well, this is how Cormac McCarthy sees your situation through one of his characters, whose monologues form the backbone of this book. The thing is, you don't have to be a prophet to know where this is all going. You just have to have the common sense. You just need to be sane, pretty much. So please, do not resort to violence against your neighbors, but also do not accept any more encroachments upon your freedoms and rights. Find like-minded people in your area and pray with them and be vocal. Stand up for one another and find other like-minded groups like yours in your city, in your county, in your state. Create fundraising campaigns for people who are seeking legal correction of their mistreatment, perhaps of being sacked or persecuted for their beliefs, and so on. And whatever you do, do not be the silent majority, be the vocal majority. Because you still are a majority, and your loud, organized voice is what the people now in power fear the most. Let your local and state politicians know your thoughts and feelings about things. Create petitions, write blogs, and be active in the public domain. Please listen to preachers and teachers like John MacArthur, Voddie Baucham, and Paul Washer, and to Christian podcasters like Todd Friel, who has a podcast called Ratchet, James White, who has the channel Alpha and Omega Ministries, and Dr. Oakley 1689, and David Wood, who has the channel Acts 17 Apologetics. And please support them. I consider these men my brothers in Christ, and I can heartily recommend them. There are also other people worth listening to, although I do not agree with all of their beliefs and lifestyle. I mean people like Peter Hitchens, Thomas Sowell, Theodore Dalrymple, Douglas Murray, Glenn Beck, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, and Steven Crowder. Listen to testimonies of people from the Walk Away campaign. They are very strong, and they confirm much of what I've said. Much of what I've said here. Listen to various interesting podcasts. I like Lex Fridman, Michael Malice, and Francis and Constantine from Trigonometry, maybe because all of these guys share my background, as all of them came from socialist dictatorships. And please study, do your own research. Do not just blindly trust the media and the authorities. Can you hear them talking about how you have a too wide choice of resources? Well, use them while you can, and fight for the right to use them in the future. There is now a huge part of your country deemed as extremist and dangerous by the progressive leftists who are now in power. Do not take that lightly. They have their lists too. Some of them have been very open about it and very eager to crack down on those people they view as the enemies of the state. Do you still believe that your new president is a moderate after the first flurry of his decrees? In order to save your country, you will have to come out of your comfort zone. I know you just want to have a quiet, peaceful life, to work and raise your children, but exactly that is under serious threat right now. So you will have to fight for it. It will take a lot of courage not to bow to the mob, not to submit to the political re-education, not to accept racist trainings aimed at purging your inherent whiteness. Courage to express your beliefs and opinions freely and in a polite yet firm manner. And as I said, it will take a lot of mutual support. When one of you gets harassed by the new ideologues for refusing to bend the knee, After 4 years of Trump and their feverish attempts to get rid of him, after the pandemic and almost losing the elections despite all their efforts, and after the 6th of January, the people now in power feel completely justified in their radicalism. Have you seen those 26,000 soldiers in Washington? What you probably perceived as your country returning back to normal was absolutely abnormal in their eyes. So you should expect normalization, and you should be prepared. These people will call evil good and good evil. They have been doing it for decades, but now they will also act on it in a very radical way. They will break existing laws. They will violate the Constitution, and they will trample on everything you hold dear and sacred, because in their eyes, all those things are just instruments of systemic oppression. So if you want to have another free and legitimate election in 4 years, and not an oligarchy or plutocracy like they have in Russia or China, you will have to fight for your rights and freedoms. The people who are now in power in your country envy Russia and China very much. Do not let them turn your country into one of those regimes. And some people will probably say that this video is no different than the videos of the left-wing alarmists who cried and were terrified after Trump was elected in 2016, that I am simply over-exaggerating. And I can understand how someone could feel that way about this video. But the most important difference is this. Those people were reacting in such a manner because of how Trump and his supporters were painted by the mainstream media, and not because how they really were. I am reacting this way because how the people who are now in power really are, and not how they are painted by the mainstream media. I hope anyone can see the difference. However, please forgive me if I said something inappropriate. This is all new to me. I am recording this on my laptop, so please excuse the video and audio quality. This is my first personal video and only my second uploaded video. But please go and watch the other one as well. It is an address made by Peter Hitchens on the question of whether Great Britain was becoming an anti-Christian country. The video has a title in Slovak and hard-coded Slovak subtitles with mangled name of Evelyn Waugh, which I was unable to recognize when I was making those subtitles, but I hope it won't be a problem. Peter presents his thoughts in a very eloquent and elegant manner and makes some absolutely crucial points in that address. Please do watch it as well. If you like this video and you think that more people should see it, please give it a like so that it catches on and gets recommended to more people. And please share it on your social media. Please subscribe to my channel, as I would like to make more videos about the spiritual background of the current state of things and talk about stuff like ancient Gnosticism and its ties to the new liberal agenda. I would also like to talk about the two beasts from the apocalypse, what they represent and how they have presented themselves throughout the history. And I would also like to look at the origins in Genesis, especially in the first 11 chapters. I would like to do it mainly because of Jordan Peterson, whom I totally support in his fight against political correctness, but whose Bible series is just a terrible butchery of the biblical text, which needs correcting. Sorry, Dr. Peterson, but that was not a good idea. So, thank you all very much for watching. Be safe and stay safe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please do so politely even if you disagree with me. And may the Lord Jesus Christ bless you and keep you all. Bye.